So you're in Mexico, right, Brandon?
I am. I
Are you
am.
are you near a beach or a La Playa, as they say down there?
I am. I am at Playa Mujeres, just outside Cancun. Highly
Now,
recommend it to all of the listeners. Come down here and enjoy the beloved hotel.
now, as we know, Matt Ray goes to Hawaii on vacation every quarter, if I remember. So, so,
Not quite.
Fantastic.
so
I wish.
let me. I just came back from vacation on San Diego, and let me make it what may be an astonishing omission for a person of my age, but I finally understand why people like beaches. It's crazy. Like I've only gone to like Texas beaches in the Gulf, which, being a native Texan, I feel like I can take some liberty in saying this. Texas beaches blow. Like they're terrible.
They are.
This just in.
Well, and the thing about Texas beaches is apparently they're the last stretch of undeveloped beaches on the East Coast.
Well,
Like the rest of it's all been bought.
because they suck. We
Yes.
we used to go to the beach when I was a kid, the Texas Gulf Beach, all the time, and it really is. I don't know if it's crystallized is the right word or tarred up is better. It just kind of crystallized in my mind that beaches were terrible. Like it's hot, you get all dirty and sandy. Like the food there is terrible. Like it's
There's some
brown
nice
water.
stuff in Port Aransas. Port Aransas has come along. Why are we talking about this? This
I don't know. Just
not our podcast.
it's just my little opener here. I just came back from San Diego, beautiful beaches.
Yes.
I assume the beaches in Mexico, wherever that is, are nice. Like it's crazy, it's great. And now it even makes me want to go down to the Texas beaches and try them out again.
No, don't do that, Cote. That will ruin it. Don't go to the Texas beaches. There's no reason to go to the Texas beaches if you have the capability to fly anywhere. Don't do it.
Okay, well I've learned something. Don't go to Texas beaches. Maybe that should be the title for this episode. Let me take that down. Don't go to Texas beaches. Speaking of Texas, there was a rumor while I was gone that Rackspace was going to go private, but that seemed to have not panned out. Right, Matt? Right?
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of news posts. Various he said, they said, we agree to disagree kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And nothing, as far as I know, nothing has changed. But there has been, the rumor was that HP had made an offer of $6 billion to buy Rackspace. I guess that makes them, kind of like IBM buying SoftLayer, leveling up their their data center game, having more real estate. But the funny thing is, I'm pretty sure Rackspace is smaller than Amazon East. So, I mean, Amazon East is the biggest, but I believe they have over 100,000 physical nodes, and I believe that's about how big Rackspace is. So just throwing that out there. Rackspace is definitely big, but AWS is a slightly larger scale.
Yeah, in looking through all the notes that we three compiled for this episode, it's a very Rackspace heavy episode. Like I read or notes at least. We'll see what we end up talking about. Maybe we'll go back to beaches. It'll be the wind beneath our wings or whatever. But I read that post by that Paul guy. That was like a fascinating post about him doing his team working on the on metal thing or whatever, and it had my favorite sequence diagrams. Did you see those in there? There were two sequence diagrams. Like I thought about this the other day when I was on a briefing. I think most of the briefings that I'm on as an analyst could be replaced by a really good sequence diagram, and I could reduce it down from 60 minutes to about a 10-minute call. It'd be wonderful.
So, Cote, random question for you then. What is you're our represent analyst. So, what is the Rackspace move, right? Like. Now everyone says, I guess they've announced they want to be acquired, or their shop, or I don't know, whatever. They're open to it. Like,
yeah,
is that really the only move left for them, or is there like? I guess I always think to myself, like, what is the alternative path for them to go forward?
Well, I've there's several alternatives, all of which have been like shot down when I emote them by various people with different interests. So I don't actually know what's true, but. Yeah, I think the one of the primary theories is that to Matt Ray's point about Rackspace versus Amazon East, part of what they need is like a bunch of cash to like build out their cloud at the scale they're at. Now, a counter theory there might be that the proper way, this is something that there's a 451 analyst, Carl Brooks, who I talk about this with, and his counter theory to that is like, well, the way that you properly build a cloud is so that you can build it like rack by rack or whatever, right? So it's not like you don't need a bunch of money up front. Now, I don't know. I'm just a lowly software developer, so you know, I don't know about this data center stuff. So maybe that does work. But my theory would be that like probably at the scale that Rackspace needs to operate at the level that it's at, it probably does need to build gigantic data centers in order to compete or whatever. So it probably needs a cash infusion. So that's when I saw the whatever, I don't know what the technical term for all that stuff was, but that letter that was basically like, hey, come at me, you can buy me, or whatever that Rackspace submitted to the SEC. My interpretation of that was we are interested in people who want to give us piles of cash. Right? Whether that means being
can I write a letter like that?
you probably can, but whether that means a PE firm like buying them, like again, I think we even talked about this when it happened. Like SoftLayer was owned by a PE firm way back when that just gave them a bunch of cash and let them invest in things, and or whether that was another public company that wanted to buy them, but whatever the case is, like I think I would like to think, and I have no basis for this other than, being a fancy pants analyst, is like it's probably hard for Rackspace to be a public company because the comparison that investors would make, because if you're buying stock, your thought is not is this a good company for me to put money in? Your thought is this the best company in this category for me to put money in? And it might be the case that investors think that there's other companies in the same category to put their money in because they don't like the growth and the profit. I don't know what, but they may not like whatever financials Rackspace is throwing off. And so maybe Rackspace is like, being a public company kind of blows. Like it's again, this is just complete speculating on my point. I could be completely wrong, but it is sort of like if you are a public company, you don't tell people to give you piles of cash unless you don't like your current state of being, right? Like having worked in strategy at a public company before, right? Like you pretty much always have to say things are awesome if you're a public company, and if you want to change the state around, it suggests that you think there's a better state of existing, if you will.
Well, and I think we all have experience working at public companies where they seem to make short-sighted decisions because they have to keep that smiley face to the public.
Yeah.
And making acquisitions that don't make a lot of sense, maybe, or what have you. But so you think that there's a possibly unfair comparison to other publicly traded public cloud vendors out there, like CenturyLink or AWS or
yeah. I mean, again, to like equivocate like my credibility or whatever here, like that's one option. I mean, it does seem like if you were to compare them to like AWS's growth, which you can invest in, right? You could put your money there, even though that would be a kind of a weird investment if you wanted to do cloud, just because they've got such a diversified business versus cloud that you'd be having to invest and follow all the other parts of Amazon. Or, even if you looked at HP, which though small is something you could invest in, or IBM, or, there's lots of other options out there. And, Rackspace is typically like second, if you will, at least in mind share and sort of brand value. I don't know the numbers, depending on how you would rate, like here's how we're saying what the number one cloud is, if it's by revenue or nodes or whatever. Like, I have no idea how that would pan out. But, like, there probably are expectations. Like if we were to go read what financial analysts write, they're probably like, if you're a public cloud company, your financials should look like this, right? Like you should be attaining this double-digit growth quarter over quarter. You should have this profitability or not profitability because you're building your cloud out and so forth and so on. And the idea that if you were any public company and you wrote a letter that said, come buy me, suggests that like you think it's a better option to be bought by someone than to remain a public company on behalf of the shareholders, right? Like you're supposed to do whatever is in the best interest of the shareholders, and so the best option, I guess, from Rackspace writing that is like they think being bought would maybe be a better option.
Yeah.
But Anyways, to get back to Brandon's question, like what are the alternative options? I mean, I think like
Here, I got one. I want to throw. I think there are two options. I really like. I like one is, okay, if we assume Google and Amazon are the competition, right? Then one is to embrace like the hybrid cloud side of it. That I think neither Google or Amazon are ever going to really, be in a position to do. So you take these really, really large companies that, we can debate this, like should they or should they not have private clouds, but clearly they want it, right? And embrace that as like a way of, listen, we're going to allow you to build and help you build that private cloud, and then and really make it a hybrid cloud because we also have hosted all of this other stuff for you. And so to make that auto scale vision come true, like that seems like an attack point that neither Google nor Amazon, just because they're strategic and the way they're organized, are ever going to really go after, right? That's not the thing they're going to do.
I think they are. And so one of the other posts I linked to is kind of a comparison of AWS and VMware's cloud hybrid service, which is exactly that. It's hey, we want to bridge your enterprise into the public cloud. VCHS does kind of a virtual private data center that extends your internal network into their managed cloud. There's other people in that game. Amazon has kind of like, oh, you want to extend vCenter into the cloud? We can do that too. And they released a plugin recently doing the same thing. Where they're.
I guess it's sort of the different. I don't know. I always get back to this. Like, you are what you are, right? Like, I just think Amazon, Google, just the nature of those businesses. And like, if you talk to someone from Amazon, right, and you say something like, in the private cloud, like I've actually been through this. They'll actually stop you. They'll actually say there is no such thing as a private cloud. They'll say there's on-premise, right? Because that's sort of like that's like the religion, right? And I get it. I actually get the vision. I actually, in some ways, respect it, right? Like, you're gonna go for it. But I think it's one of those things where just the nature of Amazon, it's not a company that's gonna go easily, retool itself to go talk to really large enterprises and talk to them about how to put infrastructure on site and the benefits of a private cloud. It's just, I think Google much the same, right? It's just not. So I just think it's like, in competition, right? It's always like trying to pick the weakness. Now, of course, that's their strength, right? The strength is they're really good at the other stuff. And and Rackspace seems like a company that's could do that, right? And then of course you couple that with the massive data centers. If you look at it that way, they have a huge advantage over other hybrid cloud providers, right? Because there really are
they should.
The cloud stuff, right? Or they should. I guess they have to be there. So I think it's an interesting. I don't know. I just always think to myself, like, that would be an interesting tact, right? To go after the super high end and try to close out AWS at the really high end and just say, hey, we can do the private cloud, hybrid cloud in a way that meets your security needs in a way that these other guys are not willing to do.
And there are vendors in that space. I think in the Magic Quadrant or whatever, kind of the one that people are like, who is this? CenturyLink. That is their business model. I think, and I think CenturyLink is bigger than Rackspace by node count. I believe I heard they have 50 data centers.
Right.
And that's that's a lot of hardware, and their model is you're not going to show up and pay with a credit card with them. You're going to go through a sales channel, and you're going to have this enterprisey experience, but they're doing that hybrid managed colo thing, and not knowing Rackspace's financials off the top of my head, I would bet that that's still most of their money is managed colo, managed hosting, managed hosted VMware, because they have a ton of that. And probably what happens, as if you're looking at them, you're like, well, are you a public cloud vendor or are you a hybrid cloud vendor? And you're going to have to pick one. And and if you think you're going to be public, you're running into the buzzsaw of Amazon and Google and Azure having a price war. And with more features at this point, and lower prices, But if you're going to go on the hybrid path, you better tighten it up, because you've got CenturyLink, you've got VMware sorting their stuff out, you've got other players entering the field like Cisco and IBM. I don't know. Rackspace has to sort that out, I guess. I guess that's why we talk.
No, I think that's the good analysis, so to speak, there that you were just saying, Matt. I mean, the sense that I get from Rackspace is they don't want to be in a pricing war, which excludes you from the public cloud as we know it. And you just rattled off, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, essentially, right? Am I leaving one off? That are sort of like that's sort of is that 4 or 3? Amazon. Anyways, that's like the gang that like is fully willing and gleeful, it seems, to go into a pricing war. And I think, traditionally Rackspace is focused on managed insert noun here, right? Like, and that's what their strength is. And I think the proposition that Brandon, floated earlier, like makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of traditional IT companies that are trying to figure out converting their services branches into a cloud era, if you will, right? So, someone like an HP had, they bought EDS a while ago when outsourcing was the word that we would use to do all that servicing, and then IBM, of course, has all of their global services people that they need to transform. So there is almost a sense of, if to answer the question another way, if I was one of the large mega tech companies and I was trying to like complete my sort of like crown of cloud, if you will, one of the major missing jewels is like a lot of technical people who can do managed cloud and add that in. And Rackspace would probably provide a lot of that skill. And more importantly, maybe not more importantly, equally importantly, the culture that Rackspace has and the processes and therefore the priorities and things that come with that are probably much more aligned to doing cloud outsourcing than traditional outsourcing. I mean, my understanding, to speak at length on another thing I know nothing about, like, normal outsourcing, I think, is sort of based on hiring the cheapest warm bodies to service something, right? Yeah. And that's how you make profit there, which kind of works out because the services you're providing, they're not like commodity services, but they're services that don't require a lot of cleverness, right? It's like reset a password, provision a new account, like all this stuff that sort of like goes through a punch list. Whereas I would imagine most of the cloud outsourcing that you need to do nowadays is sort of like solve the problem. How? I have no idea, right? Like just figure out what's wrong and like know Linux well enough that you can go in and figure it out. And so probably the services, the culture and resources that a lot of these big companies have, like they just kind of like don't really work with cloud services at the moment. So I don't know. There's another like crazy theory that would be a nice asset to have in Rackspace. Is like, as a company, they're good at undefined outsourcing problems, which I guess you call managed hosting, essentially, which would complete a lot of the cloud portfolio and ambitions and slideware that lots of big companies have.
Yeah, and I think they you're right that's what they're really good at, and they have their DevOps as a service offering, which is exactly what you're describing. Like, you don't have the resources. You can't hire the sorts of big web guys who know that tech stack. We can outsource that to us. You focus on your application. We'll cultivate the cloud side of things. The problem is, like, that's a high touch, a relatively high touch thing, high profit, but trying to scale that up to make investors happy on as a public company, I have a dislike of being in public companies because I know that you feel constrained, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that gets back to the rambling nonsense I was talking about earlier. Is the way that you're categorized as a company like matters a lot if you're on the public market, and so there's several companies that can be profitless for years and no one cares and everyone's excited about their growth because they're thought of that way. And so as another alternative path, right, like and you can see Rackspace trying to do this continually in its marketing, right? They could there's a marketing alternative that if they're successful they could better explain what we were just talking about, like this is the kind of cloud we are. And therefore, we fit this profile, and everyone should be happy with that. and that's one path that they're going down, is like saying we're a managed cloud company. And I don't know. I mean, that could be perfectly fine. And it actually does to the worrying about Matt Ray's right that it's like a high touch thing. It's equally high profit, but it's lower volume, higher profit, if you will, right?
Yeah.
And that's a lot. Whenever people talk about enterprise cloud over the past 5 years, they're going for that, right? Like they don't want like the commodity cloud things, and that's why I would think all these big companies would like that asset in rack space, if you will, of being able to do all that high touch managed cloud stuff.
And that's probably why by HP, or someone like HP makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I mean, for other alternatives, I don't think this one is valid for rack space, but you can look at I think we even had like a link to some Joyent thing in the agenda here. I mean, Joyent also sells its platform as software, right? Their smart data center thing. So rack space could get into, and again, I don't think it's a good idea. They could get into a software business and sell products, and in a much more, the private cloud thing they offer could be more oriented around a software product rather than a service that they provided. And they could even resell it to competitors, right, to run their cloud, have some sort of federation of cloud, if you will. And again, I don't think that's a good idea because it kind of directly attacks what their core thing is, but that is an alternative of different businesses to get into.
But I think you just described what they've done, right? I mean,
yeah.
that was OpenStack. The OpenStack was, hey, we're not catching up with Amazon. Let's work with an open source community to build up a better product. And we'll use it to power our public cloud. Now they're selling it as private cloud. They've talked about federating with other OpenStack clouds. It's just,
And I think this gets to an even broader point is, I struggle with this all the time. Is that it does seem like there's two potential like types of cloud usage. There's like public cloud as we know it, and the stuff that your guys' companies I think support a ton of, right? Which is like I'm building like a brand new web or mobile application that I'm going to run on public cloud infrastructure, and I need to do that, right? And then there's sort of like the vast like under the water iceberg of just boring enterprise IT from the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Right? And there's all that stuff. And I don't think very much of that at all is running on anything that we would call cloud. And I also don't know for sure if it will ever run on public cloud or when or if it will, right? Like technically it's sort of could, and there's no reason not to, I guess, in like a 5-year horizon, but there's always continually this big question of like, well, do I just need some better virtualization and management, right? And I think that's another annoying thing for if you're not an extremely diversified like public cloud company. Like if you're small enough that you can just live off the current market of I need to put a bunch of apps up or I need to do the stuff that I would use cloud for, then that's fine. And you see people like DigitalOcean and other people just like with insane growth because they can go after like pools of that. But if you're like a larger company, like at some point you have to start going after that 30 years of boring IT because you're just going to run out of like you're going to run out of like new people are like, I don't know, I wrote 5 apps this year, I'm done, right? Like I got to go to the Texas beaches. And so that's another option is like how could Rackspace get more and more into the 30 years of like old IT, if you will, and support.
But so they have a lot of that. They have a lot of that in their VMware stuff.
I think that's the I mean, to your point, I think you kind of answered it, Matt Ray. I think finding a new, better, easier way to package this stuff, right? So, and we've talked a lot about Docker, which is sort of like the new thing, and then Matt Ray kind of already hit on VMware, which is sort of which really is truly the enterprise, like way, and it's really where most of VMware goes on. So, I think that's like another pivot option for Rackspace. Much harder, right? Is like, can you find a better, faster, cheaper way to package up all these things and allow someone to move it to a hybrid cloud or a public cloud in a way, and then really focus in on that. Whereas, again, like maybe Google, maybe Amazon get interested in that, but that really they seem dominated by the new stuff. So
no, and exactly, and that's exactly what I'm going to in a confusing way is like I very rarely see like cloud companies talking about like, oh yeah, we'll run your ERP application. Like to go back to Matt Ray's Magic Quadrant obscurity contest, right? Like there's companies in there that kind of do that and like focus on that stuff, but also a lot of these companies like they don't like, remember when we were at BMC, we were at the coffee machine one day, and this like country fried hair lady came up and said, "Are y'all distributed people? Y'all talk like distributed people." And she was like a mainframe person, right? And like, so a lot of these cloud companies that work on this 30 years of boring IT, they talk like mainframe people, right? Like they don't talk like cloud people, and it's really hard for like, I don't know, to like understand what it is they do. And so someone like, to your point, Brandon, right? Like someone like a Rackspace could come in and figure out the language barrier, if you will, and articulate better. Like there's all this IT out there, and we have a faster and cheaper way of doing it in a cloud way. And you're just kind of forklifting into cloud, if you will. And that would be interesting. And it kind of gets to the point of like, so to be really abstract and obtuse, like what Rackspace could do is kind of re-explain what cloud is and say like there's this whole other type of enterprise cloud, and we're really good at that. They could make a market for that, if you will. Instead of it just being normal IT, you kind of like convert all of that existing IT they have into enterprise cloud, if you will, or something like that.
And I think they're hitting all those things. It's just they have a lot of things to hit, and I don't know, either they're not big enough to do it. I mean, they're big, like what, 5,000 people, something like that.
Yeah.
But maybe they just can't hire enough to cover that much ground. When you compare them to like an IBM or an HP.
Yeah.
Essentially on like a buying spree. They're buying up companies left and right.
I feel like Matt Ray, you're predicting doom and gloom.
No.
Everything we thought is like you've answered with they're doing that. It's like, okay, back it up, big gentlemen.
No, actually, it's not. It's just I think they have the opportunity to be really successful. I just think that because they're a public company, the unrealistic demands of that are making them, or giving them a hard time. I think Rackspace is successful, but I love lots of folks over there, but it seems like there's an unrealistic expectation.
Yeah, and the other issue, I mean, that kind of touches on a little bit of what I was saying earlier is, like in the surveys that we have, there's a tremendous amount of buyers, if you will, of people who are actually spending money on this, who are evaluating cloud, and in the next 2 years want to do something in cloud, right? Like there's a lot of people who want to do cloud. There's not necessarily a lot of people who are doing cloud, like in aggregate, in the normal world, right? And I think, again, this gets to like, the issue becomes, if you're doing like apps or whatever, using cloud is well understood, but in the gigantic world of just boring enterprise IT, I don't think it's figured out. And so, like, and you see all of the big cloud companies kind of stumble through over the past 5 years what their cloud offering is going to be, and is it a PaaS or is it an IaaS, or what are they going to do? And they have to iterate through it and figure it out. And that takes a lot of resources and time and money to burn through to figure out what the right way of doing cloud is. And so, a lot of what a company like Rackspace and even CenturyLink and all these guys and gals need to do is just go out there and figure out what actually works, and have a technology there, which is kind of an annoying message to have, is like, oh yeah, we're figuring it out. Like we're figuring out what the market wants, because the market itself is figuring out what it wants. Yeah. And it is, I mean, that's kind of the issue in cloud at the moment. And like, when I was reading over all these notes to kind of reculturate myself from the beach, as it were, like, man, this stuff is like almost as confusing as Linux was back in the 2000s. Like I remember that like Matt Ray used to be the person I would go to, and I'd be like, hey, I spent 10 minutes trying to understand this. Can you just type in things to make it work? And it's just like Amazon announced like some low energy thing, and then you've got the bare metal thing over here, and you've got 20 different profiles over here, and just like, holy crap, I thought this thing was supposed to be easy, and now it's kind of turned into a buffet of options. It's like a Mongolian buffet, but there's only 3 dishes that you can make to be successful, and the rest of it you just end up failing at.
And you're standing really close to the grill, like, ow!
Those flying swords. So I think that's part of the issue, is like it's again, unless there's very clear defined use cases of cloud that you're going to do, it's going to be weird, right, to go out and use cloud.
Well, and so there are like 2 things we can follow up on there. We can go into to the more bleeding edge thing, which is like Docker and container side of the cloud, or you actually like spurred. You mentioned something that made me think. What about like Amazon and their announcements today about the Zocalo? Did you see that?
Oh yeah. It's like it's a Dropbox thing, right?
Yeah, it's like, oh, you happen to be hosting all your stuff on S3, so are we now. It's like, oh, you have an IPO coming up, Box? Ta-da!
Yeah, that does have to be pretty annoying. And then Google announced what was it, like we went over this last time, like a terabyte or whatever for $120 a year, included with your email and calendaring, which is a insane amount of space. Yeah, so that seems like a tragic market to be in at the moment.
But I do think if anyone, I know we talked about it briefly last week, that book, like the Everything Story about Amazon, it talks a lot about one of the strategies was they invited resellers early on, like, hey, resell whatever your stuff is on Amazon, and resellers loved it. They got in there, made a lot of money, but then Amazon saw what worked and then started to offer it themselves. So it's like really what you see in that AWS is a lot of the same thing. It's like, okay, we saw how people hosted kind of these file sharing services, and now we're going to do it. So really, you could have predicted that. If just like knowing Amazon, it's like they invite you in, and then they learn, and then they're going to compete. And it's been obviously a good strategy for them up to now. We'll see how it goes.
Well, yeah.
Did you see the pricing on it? Is the pricing competitive? Or have they not even announced that yet? I haven't actually looked.
I don't know. It was. I assume it's really cheap, and it's probably undercutting, the competition that runs on top of S3.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think the other like Dropbox box problem is one day iCloud will actually work. Like that would be that would clobber a huge part of the market, right? Like I mean, there is a theory, which I don't know if it's true or not, that Dropbox is actually not that easy to use, if you will. Like the idea of getting it installed and up and running and stuff is not as easy as it can be. I think like on that famous podcast, Accidental Tech Podcast, they talk about that every now and then, which I hadn't really considered that because Dropbox seems really easy to me, but maybe it is like for regulars, for normals, it's not an easy solution, which would suggest that something like Apple's iCloud would be the better alternative because it just kind of is there.
Well, doesn't work. Doesn't Microsoft build stuff into their OS these days?
Oh yeah, those guys. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
No,
so you got to expect like OS X 10.10 or 10.11. When they sort it out, it'll just be part of the OS, and then
Yeah, and as we all know, once you've basically solved what is it, NFS file sharing, that pretty much handles all application needs you ever need, right? So maybe it'll obviate this whole cloud stuff. Like once we have logical file sharing across devices that's just seamless, then all this SaaS stuff, we just won't need it anymore.
NFS for the cloud.
Exactly. Wow. The beach does wonderful things.
I'm ready to go back.
It's funny. It's like you say it's like that, but then it's like that plus user management, right? User access. Yeah. Like when that is figured out, it's over, right? Like I can share a file, and I can easily grant Matt Ray access without having to know, 25 of his email addresses, or, it's just so complicated. It's like, oh yeah, Matt Ray, he's right here. This is his identity. Yep. I know him.
I did it with single sign-on.
Yeah. And
I know it is. It's like single sign. It's the same problems every year. Single sign-ons, user access, sharing files. Like that's it.
And it is an interesting thought exercise. Again, addressing that 30 years of like exciting enterprise IT. Like how much of that could be reduced to like an in-browser spreadsheet, essentially, right? And we have that from various vendors now that just culturally people don't use those spreadsheets, or maybe not even an in-browser spreadsheet, maybe just an Excel spreadsheet on a cloud storage drive, right? Like maybe that would solve a lot of problems as well. Like it is, because I think most things still run off of spreadsheets, and it's just a matter of not having that good NFS file share to share everything on, and having access control, as Brandon points out.
What is funny, if you've ever worked in, I mean, maybe every company's like this. It's like there just become silos of file sharing systems, like whether it's Box or Dropbox or Google or whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
but you can never get everyone together. I don't know. I think I've sort of, I don't know. It seems like one of these like problems that will live on for like hundreds of years, and like, yeah, like everyone should just agree, but it's never going to happen. Like, I don't know. I don't get it. I'm never going to understand it.
I'm sure Microsoft still makes an enormous amount of money with SharePoint. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally true.
And Rackspace does managed SharePoint hosting.
Maybe that's where all the money is. Just manage SharePoint. That's all we all need. More SharePoint.
So maybe to be a little less gloom and doom, this is what happens when you come back from vacation. Everything seems terrible. But so you put in this Keen IO funding. Let's switch to business analytics and BI, Brandon. What are they doing over there?
Well, what caught my eye there is, I do a lot with monitoring, and that seems to be well understood, right? Everyone's always trying to monitor things, and that comes up a lot. But when it gets down to like actually understanding what people do in your application, that is mostly, from what I can tell, still stuff that people roll up themselves. Like they use Google Analytics or maybe Omniture, and then they kind of customize other data that they collect. So Keen.io is sort of like taking that on, right? The idea is like embedding kind of that data collection, what people are doing kind of within an application, not so much the performance, just what they're doing. And for me, like obviously on the product management side, this is always what you're trying to get. And I know you guys both have some ties to the developer world. It's always like, you go in a room and people are like, how many people use this feature, right? And like nobody really knows, and then there's like a lot of arguments about it, and then what it should do, and then SaaS was supposed to save that, but that's only today. It just takes a lot of time and effort to instrument the applications, and I think Keen.io is kind of an interesting little take on that. It's like, hey, this is what we're going to specialize in, telling you what people do and let you monitor that stuff. And but again, it kind of comes down to like, will developers embrace that and do that as part of just like standing up the application, right? Because I know from personal experience, I think everybody knows, like once it's built, to go back and add all this stuff back in, like nobody ever wants to do that.
So they actually have an offering that will like wrap all the calls in your application and tell you like what like what pages and features and things are being used?
Yeah, basically you can kind of, essentially put it in the line, kind of instrument your application to send back the data about what people are doing inside your application, and then they'll host that for you, right? So it's kind of like, if you will, for like Google Apps for like application analytics that you are customizing yourself, right? So if you have a website or a web application and you want to do all that, you can do it with them, and they're really catered towards the developer audience, trying to get them to actually instrument that stuff. So like this is the kind of stuff that's typically either thrown in log files or you run custom queries after the fact. So I don't know, just from a business standpoint, or someone that's more focused on how people are using and building applications, it's the kind of stuff I wish just sort of like was like out of the box, right? Like people just did it as part of like, hey, I need single sign-on, I need to log things, I need some user permission model, and I'm going to actually, every feature I add, I'm going to actually count, see if people use it, right, and do something. Because it just seems like it would help so much software, right? Like if we could all just look at a piece of software and say what's getting used, it'd be awesome.
So as a product manager, have you ever experienced this kind of like detailed logging access to who's using what?
I've never had like in a really good, easy way. Like I've obviously had a lot of access to Google Analytics, but that sort of just tells you what pages are, right? But if you really go, because most applications, right, you just can kind of go down the list and count the features, and you're like, okay, how many people are using this specific feature that you worked X amount of time on? And then of course there's always like a developer who wants to take something out because it hasn't been touched in a long time, and but everyone's just scared, right? Everyone's like, well, I don't know. I'm not sure who's using it or why. And then it's just hard to get at. So I think, I don't know, I just kind of come back to like, hey, when you, like, I don't know, maybe you guys can educate me here. Like I always believe like when you put stuff out, it's so interesting to see if someone's using it. Like it makes it real, right? So I always wonder or want like, hey, if you're building a feature as a developer, like just for your own like interest, like instrument it in a way, like let's count how many times this was used, because it kind of gives you the warm fuzzy, either it is or it isn't, right? But make it really easy for the whole entire company to see, right? And actually start to make good decisions on, because the monitoring data is usually there, the analytics data is usually there, but then you have to go ask the one developer, like, hey, can you tell me how many people did this? And they can kind of do it, but it's just, it's kind of like in the basement, if you will, of how to get information like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like you can see those heat map things in Google, and they're not heat maps, but like where people have clicked on your website. And I used to go look at those all the time, and it was depressing. like people wouldn't look on things, but I think the reason it was also depressing is like I never did anything about it, right? And that's
A/B testing on your blog. Put the about on the left, and I get more people finding out who Michael Cote is.
Yeah, I just did A testing. Just do one way, never change it. See how that works. There was no B. But yeah, no, it is like it's interesting. Like now that we have now that I work at a place that has a paywall, we have very detailed analytics of who reads what, and it's curious to go look at it and see like what types of people are reading articles, and also to kind of see the long tail of who reads it and things like that. And And if I were to actually do something about that, that would be fascinating as well.
Well, I think that's where I think you hit on it, Cote. Like, it's interesting that last part you said, like, does it drive action? Like, this is like, some phrase in some book I read about, like, output oriented versus execution oriented. And output's just like, I just get a lot of stuff done, but you kind of think to yourself, does it really matter to the business? And execution is like, I'm focused in on executing things that are really helping the company. And I think sometimes people don't measure it because they don't think it will matter, right? Like, hey, I just do this feature, it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter how many people use it or don't use it, I just have to do that, right? Which is obviously the wrong attitude and leads to lots of bad software. But sometimes I do understand, like in large companies or any company, even small companies, right? It's like, it kind of, because people are just telling you to do it, and they don't, there's not that empowerment feeling. You just like, what? And then that's maybe your example is like, hey, when it doesn't matter. We had to write a report on mainframe. We just had to. Like, it just, even though no one read it, we had to do it. So let's not even debate it, right? Or whatever topic is more obscure at 451.
Yeah.
But if you look too closely, you're going to start writing articles like top 10 usages of your mainframe.
That's right. Top 10 definitions for a hybrid cloud. That's probably like
is that one of the show notes?
Would have like 10 different pictures. We'll have to click on 10 different things, like with a big picture as we go through it.
Yeah.
Just giving the page views.
Where you spend 5 minutes trying to find the print option so you can just read the article. That's what we really need. So why don't we pick an item to close out on here? It sounds like nap time is over in Mexico. The siesta es no moro, as they say. Wow, that sounds terrible.
That's the show title. The siesta es no moro.
Let me type that in. The siesta es no moro. Perhaps the most terrible episode ever. Anyways.
I say that every episode.
So how do you pronounce this container management thing, Matt Ray?
Oh, I think, we might have to save this one for next week, but just getting the pronunciation right. I believe it is pronounced Kubernetes.
Kubernetes, because it may be Greek.
The T is a C. I think it's Greek. I think I saw that somewhere. I don't know what it. Maybe it's on Wikipedia. Maybe I'll find it and put it in the show notes.
And this is some sort of container management fabric.
Yeah,
so has all sorts of support behind it from other vendors, including Microsoft and IBM and other people like that, right?
Right. So at DockerCon last month, Google announced this project that they were open sourcing, Kubernetes, and when I started, and it looks very similar to Mesos. And I think, I guess it looks really similar to Mesos, where it's a cluster scheduling fabric that you run across a large deployment. So you have, say you have 100 servers, they are your Kubernetes layer, and then you would provision clusters into that. And so, so it handles like, five of the cluster servers went down. Let's let's move those nodes somewhere else. Or the contract said we had 100 nodes, 100 web nodes running at all times. it goes and makes sure that they're 100, not 95.
Right.
And so it's that layer, and it handles things like affinity or anti-affinity and scheduling, and so it's tightly coupled with Docker is kind of the takeaway.
And so is that kind of like what Mesos does? Like Mesos is a similar fabric of, and yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
how many of these things exist?
A passel.
Yeah. Less than a baker's dozen, but more than a cobbler's pair.
Yeah. Yes. So there was. I got to the point where at DockerCon they announced a new library called libswarm that's going to provide the common API for managing Docker containers. So those things all can talk to those sorts of fabrics can all talk to it the same way. And so but there's a bunch, and the thing about Kubernetes is, like Google. So Google had they wrote some white papers about their infrastructure, as they do, and then people go off and write an open source implementation, and that's what Mesos is. It got written up by Google describing their infrastructure, Borg, I believe is what they called it, and so I think Yahoo went and wrote Mesos and open sourced it, and Twitter's using it now, and there's a company behind it.
Mesosphere.
Yeah, Mesosphere, exactly. And so, Mesos has taken off, but it's written in Java. It's kind of heavyweight, requires Zookeeper. It's a big service, but I guess the assumption is you're going to run a whole lot of infrastructure on top of it.
And then CoreOS kind of has some of this stuff baked into it as well, which is some of this stuff, right?
Well, no. So CoreOS is the CoreOS is in this space too. They've got etcd, and Fleet is their version of this. Fleet is like a distributed scheduler for handling pods of infrastructure. They need some common terminology or whatever, but pods, clusters of containers. And so Fleet is that scheduler. That's their thing. That's their version of Mesos. But CoreOS is a really stripped down Linux operating system for just running cluster, on top of it. CoreOS has chosen, they've written Fleet and etcd as their protocol to manage these things, but they've kind of also, they're on this Kubernetes announcement that, hey, you can run this all on top of CoreOS as well. So I don't know, are they hedging their bets? I'm not sure. But the interesting thing to me about Kubernetes is, I hope I'm pronouncing it right because I said it like 100 times, is that it's not what
it's either
Google
that
uses.
or Kubernetes.
Yeah, Kubernetes.
Kubernetes. It's a delicious sausage you can get in New Jersey.
Yeah. So the thing about Kubernetes is it's not what Google uses. They open source this project, and my understanding is they're like, hey, this is how we run infrastructure inside of Google. We'll open source a reference implementation if you wanted to try to do it yourself. Like Google doesn't use Docker. They use let me contain this for you, which is their version of Docker. But they're merging that way, and they want people to use Kubernetes so they can treat it as a first-class citizen on top of Google compute.
And then in theory, you would use this Kubernetes like across other service providers. It would sort of be like a common management.
Which is right. Which is why
all sorts of clouds, public or private or hybrid or whatever.
Which is why IBM and Red Hat and Microsoft and Mesosphere are all jumped on this press release. They're like, all right, that's how we're going to roll. Let's do this. So
yeah. And that's a slightly not perfectly aligned OpenStack gang, right? So it's like you once pointed out that like OpenStack is everyone except Microsoft and Google or something.
Everyone
like that.
but Google and Amazon, right?
Yeah. And so then there's another like potential little like league over here of people who are not OpenStack.
But they are, right? Because IBM is and Red Hat is, and
they're not fully OpenStack people, if you will. They're just anyways, or maybe not. I don't know. Anyways, it's just a whole other class.
And it's like that Adrian Cockcroft quote about Docker being an end around of OpenStack. Maybe it is.
And then being an end around Cloud Foundry. Like
that's what it was. It wasn't OpenStack. It was Cloud Foundry.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Fun.
So we should wrap up this episode.
Yes.
Perhaps the best organized episode ever, with lots of wild speculation. Yeah. I maybe I'll just delete it and not release it. we'll see
but what about our listeners?
Yeah, and the one. That's right. Well, so I guess we'll see everyone next week. Enjoy your time on vacation, Brandon, in Mexico. Eat plenty of tacos.
I will.
Have a good siesta.
Yeah.
Adios, gentlemen.
Bye-bye.
Hasta luego.